presenter today. Is it going to be to this chamber? Okay, thanks. Come on up. And then we'll be talking about the effect of nonprofit governance on asset diversion amount.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very honored to present my research work here. My name is Chengjiang Wu, and from Rutgers Business School, and my co-author is Professor Richard Dow from West Virginia University. According to a recent report conducted by ACFE, the nonprofit organizations in the United States are experiencing severe fraud, resulting to a loss amount of up to $75,000 US. So this research focuses on the nonprofit organizations that report being aware of a significant asset diversion in Form 990, which is the tax return for organizations that are exempt from income tax. There has been prior research provided evidence, a qualitative evidence, that stronger governance leads to less likelihood of fraud. But this research tries to advance the prior research quantitatively. Specifically, this study examines the association between the disclosed dollar amount of loss and the duration of asset diversion and the governance level in nonprofit organizations. Furthermore, this research is trying to examine whether the governance level increases significantly following the year when the asset diversion is discovered. Well, this is the hypothesis development process. As I said, prior research provides evidence that stronger governance level leads to less likelihood of asset diversion. Furthermore, there is also prior research providing evidence that in for-profit settings, the governance level is significantly correlated with fraud occurrence measured by dollar amount. So in this research, we hypothesize that the dollar amount of loss in the nonprofit organization is negatively associated with the governance level. Prior research finds the duration measured in terms of year of asset misappropriation depends on certain anti-fraud control mechanisms. So the second hypothesis in this research is that the duration of asset diversion is negatively associated with governance level. Furthermore, there's also prior research finds that in for-profit settings, the companies increases the governance level right after a fraud is committed. So the third hypothesis in this research is that the governance level in nonprofit organizations increases in the tax year right after in the year when the asset diversion is discovered. This research adopts WGI, which stands for Weighted governance index to measure the governance level in nonprofit organizations. Specifically, this index looks at the responses to 16 questions related to governance in the Form 990 and weigh each of them by their standard deviation. And finally, add the numbers, sum up the numbers as the weighted governance index. The benefit of using the weighted number is that it takes the advantage of the fact that the variability in responses to these governance questions contains more information. For example, if one of the questions is responses all the same by all of the organizations, it seems like that this question is kind of useless question, and vice versa. So this is an example of one of the 16 questions. In Form 990, Part 6, Question 13 asks, did the organization have a written whistleblower policy? If the organization answers yes to this question, we would regard this value as 1 and sum it up. Otherwise, 0. So this is a list of all of the 16 questions that we look at in Form 990. And also, the weights of these questions are listed as the at the 4th column in this list. Well, this regression model is used to test the first hypothesis. The dependent variable is dollar amount of loss. The independent variable is WGI, which stands for Weighted Governance Index, used to measure the governance level. We take the complexity, age, program ratio, growth, and size as the control variables. Also, we consider the year effect and industry effect. We use a similar regression model to test the second hypothesis. The only difference to the first one is that the dependent variable becomes duration of the asset diversion. Duration here is measured in terms of years. In order to test the third hypothesis, t-test is used. Alright, this is the description of all of the variables in our regression model. Professor Richard Dahl just introduced the general process of data collection in the morning. Here, I would like to tell that for those organizations that report being aware of asset diversion in Form 990, it is required by IRS that they also disclose the dollar amount of loss and duration information in Schedule O, which is an attached schedule to Form 990. We manually read through all of the Schedule O and collect the dollar amount of loss and duration information. To the best of my knowledge, this is the first research that utilized the full population of e-file from the 90s since 2011 for empirical research purpose. Well, this is the empirical results. As expected, the first hypothesis is supported by our empirical results. As you can see here, the coefficient of weighted governance index is negative, and the p-value is 0.8%. This result indicates that the dollar amount of loss is negatively associated with the governance level in nonprofits. But the second hypothesis is not supported. As you can see here, the p-value is 0.82. As expected, the third hypothesis is supported by our results. The governance level in the following year, right after the year when the asset diversion is discovered, is significantly higher than that in the previous year. In this research, we also use another governance measurement to do the robustness test. In order to do the robustness test, we use governance index 14. The difference between this governance measurements and the prior one is that this governance measurement eliminates the governance variables that have a correlation greater than 0.8 with another governance variables. So with this criteria, two of the 16 variables are removed. Furthermore, these variables are not weighted. Likewise, the robustness test supports the first hypothesis. The coefficient of dollar amounts of loss is still negative, and the p-value is 1.3%. The second hypothesis is also not supported by the robustness test. And similarly, the third hypothesis is supported by the robustness test here, using another measurement of governance level for nonprofit organizations. So the conclusion of this research is threefold. First, the disclosed dollar amounts of asset diversion events is negatively associated with governance level of nonprofit organization. Secondly, the duration of asset diversion is not significantly associated with governance level of nonprofit organizations. Thirdly, the governance level in the following year becomes significantly higher than that in the year when asset diversion is discovered. All right, that's all of my presentation. Thank you. And I'm looking forward to your feedback, comments, or any questions.
I think thank you for the good presentation, and I think all the three hypotheses are all related, but the second hypothesis is not supported. So would you give us some possible explanation for your why it is not supported?
in this research, the second hypothesis is that the duration of asset diversion is negatively correlated with the governance level, but the results do not support the second hypothesis. I think one of the possible reasons is that actually very little amount of organizations disclose the duration information in their Schedule O, resulting in a very small amount of samples. Also, this is one of the limitations of this research.
But the number of observers was the same, or the like number of observations was, I think, the same one for the second test as to the first and the third one. Was not it?
Not the same. We eliminate the observations that do not report or disclose the duration. Yes.
And then
but almost all of them disclose the amount information in the Schedule O instead of the duration, even though it is the requirement by IRS.
if not having the sufficient number of observations for the second hypothesis, then what's the rationale behind developing this hypothesis at all? Maybe.
What?
Restate your question to it.
Oh, I see. So, regarding to the number of observations, I think it is more than 400 observations are used to test the first hypothesis, and less than 200 to test the second one.
Here.
Yeah.
What was the p-value on that one, the second one?
It is 80% or say
18.18 or?
The 0.80.
0.8.
0.8, okay. But the reason, basically, that was developed before we did the analysis, or if it was enough, or what was going on there. So, and.
But now you are aware, so you can drop.
Well, but.
You have 3. It's anyway.
Well,
It's
You
more
can,
than,
but at the same time, is that really ethical to say, well, I'm only gonna report the things that turn out the way we want it to be? So that's one reason we left it in, because it needs to be there.
Yeah, then maybe you try like think about how to provide its implications in a better way,
Right.
rather
And
to say that it's not sufficient observations.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that we're working on now is the implications of that.
Real quick, I know we have at least one more question, but also just a reminder, if you haven't voted yet, please vote, because we're going to be collecting them after this Q&A session. If you haven't voted yet, do so.
I think it's the last of the three. Oh, no, sorry, the first. It says that the conclusion you come to is that where you have good governance, essentially you end up with a lower amount of disclosed losses. And so my question is really, what exactly is the story that you're telling? Does that mean that there are really lower losses or simply lower reported amounts? Because that, it doesn't seem clear yet, and maybe that's part of the implications that you're still developing for it. But as I say, does that mean really lower losses or simply lower reporting? That's the question, yeah.
Oh, yes.
That's this presentation.
Comment or question?
This is coming.
Well, regarding to this question, I think the amount reported on Form 990, almost all of them confront with the actual loss.
Okay.
So I think that's the number of loss.
So it's the actual amount of loss, not just the amount reported. It may not be the same thing.
I have a comment on that also. They're reporting to the IRS, you know it's exactly what it's supposed to be.
Okay.
Mark that as sarcasm, okay?
Yeah.
But I think, you know, the overall story is people really know what they need to be doing with governance. But a lot of times they don't do it until they have the loss.
Right.
So what can we do to go ahead and improve governance before we have losses?
Yeah.
I mean, that's the bottom line of the story, I think, with
Mhm.
what's going on.
Okay.
I think an interesting extension of your work, because you now have this data set. One way that donors to not-for-profit organizations have to measure the quality of the organization, there's two websites, and at this moment I can only think of one. Charity Navigator is one of them, and I can't think of the name of the other. But you should.
GuideStar.
GuideStar, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
This data is a natural to look at the effectiveness of those measures, GuideStar and Charity Navigator. And I'm not sure which one you would say is a more credible source, but they are maybe in semi-independent takes on the same issue. Should I make my charitable contribution to organization X or to organization Y? And I think you have some real data there that could be very interesting.
Yes. Well, when we developed this database, when we finished developing this database, we compared some of the random records with the records in GuideStar. The GuideStar provides the PDF files, and by these random comparisons, we find that our data is consistent with that provided from GuideStar. So I think the data is reliable.
I think that donors would find that information helpful.
Yes.
I think that donors would find that statement helpful. I mean, it's a measure of how good GuideStar is, which, again, who is auditing the auditors?
Yes.
I have one comment to provide it. So those evaluation organizations, they actually are nonprofit themselves. And if you want to evaluate the nonprofit through the guest star, they basically send information to the employees of the nonprofit and ask them to provide some information. Basically, it's more like an internal kind of information. And also, because of this, from the donor perspective, is more evaluate to which organization is more effective to using their donation money. So it's more valuable if we look at it based on our classification. So we separate by the industry, we give them the coding, and people can use it as a guideline to find out which organization is more credible and which organization should be more deserve our donation money.
And one last thought real quick. I mean, we talk about reporting the amount of frauds, but it seems to me like that itself is a bit of a sweet spot. I mean, the adage is that we don't know the best fraud that's being committed right now because they're not getting caught. So by the time you're reporting it, you probably already are starting to get your house in order anyway, because that's how you discovered the fraud. So I worry about the narrative being disclosed, like once we've found it, Do you see what I'm saying? It's just kind of a concerning thing, but still, just maybe tweak the story that you're telling just a little bit, that's all. All right. Back. All right, so real quick, I'm just gonna come around and, Robin, you can handle that side, we're just gonna collect the voting sheets. Oh. That was quick. And remember, so if we're gonna be talking about the winners and everything, so it's at 4:30 at E&O, and give me a second, I'll see if I can get a map on it.